Today we're going to get started here in just a second with the Franklin Roundtable, a little bit of a different topic, talking about German POWs in Tennessee during World War II by Dr. Elizabeth Taylor. So stay tuned with us. We're having a little bit of difficulty with technology, but we'll get started here in just a minute or so. Thank y'all for tuning in.
I owe you one prize, so. Uh-huh. Let's see.
The live stream is now on, so.
Oh, thank you. Is it about 30, 35 minutes to speak?
Yeah, 30, 35 minutes, and you can leave the rest for questions and things like that.
Okay. I always like to do a timer in case I just.
Yeah. I mean, if you need to go 45 minutes, that's fine too.
Okay.
We have an hour.
And I'll go get some poppy pins before I leave. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're fine, Jeff.
It doesn't look like it's going to work.
Okay. It's okay.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, I am fine.
Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for being very patient with our technical difficulties. I am a historian, not a technology person, so thank y'all for being very patient. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. This month is a little bit different topic, kind of World War II history, some local Tennessee history. Not a lot of people know there were German POWs held here in Tennessee, so I thought it'd be kind of interesting to throw out a little bit of a different topic. And so our speaker today is Dr. Elizabeth Taylor. Somehow I keep getting a lot of celebrities to speak here. Sam Elliott, Elizabeth Taylor. So thank y'all for coming. And also thank you for pre-gaming with us today before the Super Bowl. So I really do appreciate that as well. I hope everybody survived the ice storms, didn't have too much damage, got power back relatively quickly. So thank y'all again for so much for coming out. Dr. Elizabeth Taylor here is going to be our speaker today. I met her several years ago. I've had a passion besides Civil War history, World War II Tennessee history, Tennessee maneuvers, and learning about that. And I've been collecting a lot of stuff for a long time. So we've been trading a lot of research and information between each other. And I've got to know her quite well. So I was very excited to have her come speak about some of the German POWs that were held here in Tennessee. So without further ado, welcome our speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Taylor.
Thank you all so much for having me. Can everybody hear me? Oh, I'm kind of loud, so if it's too loud, let me know that too. So I'm going to start my timer so that I don't keep you here too long. But I passed out 2 articles, and they're not directly related to what we're going to talk about today as far as Camp Forrest and POWs, but I like to give them out because they kind of put in perspective time. I think sometimes we lose sight how long ago or how short a period of time things occurred. And in the first article here, and I think it's just amusing as well, this one is about a Confederate veteran that got to know some of the young men in the 33rd Division. And World War II started just 80 years after the Civil War had ended. And so we still had a lot of Confederate veterans, a lot of Union veterans, but he was showing him the 37 millimeter gun, and the veteran said that that couldn't really hurt a mosquito, that he should have really seen the nice guns that they had during his war. And so again, putting it in perspective of technology at the time as well as the time period. And the other one is about Arch Hogue. And I learned about Arch and his story from a good friend. And I think his is great because Arch did train at Camp Forrest and he did go overseas and saw a lot of action. But what makes him special in his story is he took the Confederate flag, and once they liberated that village in France, he rose that flag up in the town square. Now that flag was very special because his uncle had taken that during World War I. And once he had liberated a particular village in France, he too had flown that flag high. But that flag had also seen another battle. It's the flag that his grandfather had during the Civil War. So that flag had been taken through 3 wars and seen a lot of action. And unfortunately, it's been lost. So I always tell people, if you see one, get the story. It might be Arch's flag, but I think it's a wonderful story to see how families and individuals vary their heritage and take things along with them in times of crisis and times of war. And I really appreciate it. Take it if you want to read it. I just think there are 2 great stories that kind of bridge the Civil War and World War II. And like Jeff said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about Camp Forrest and the prisoners of war that were brought to the U.S. Now, I've been researching Camp Forrest for about 17 years, and that's a long time, and some people have said, well, there's nothing else you can say, and I tell them, well, you're quite wrong about that. I always have something to say. And there's always wonderful connections that can be made. What makes my story, if you will, and Camp Forrest unusual is I don't have any strong military connections prior to Camp Forrest in my research. My grandfathers were in World War II, but that was about it. And I'm not from Tennessee. I don't have family in Tennessee. Short of going to Shelbyville for horse shows, that was my experience. But a friend of mine started telling me about the POWs that were here in the States, and I thought he was pulling my leg because all the decades I was in college, never heard of it. And my OCD went into hyper overdrive and hasn't settled yet, for good or for bad, and so I'm still researching this. And I drive 3.5 hours almost every month, every other month, to come and research, to give presentations, do interviews, and keep this story going. I've done 3 books. The last one came out in November, and some say I'm a glutton for punishment because I've already started the 4th one that's going to be focusing on the Tennessee maneuvers. And I found that a lot of people don't understand that. I've also found people love pictures, and so this is going to be more concentrated on telling that story through images. And we've also done museum exhibits, traveling art exhibits on POW art, because my goal, I think it gets lost with the History Channel, Wikipedia, and some of your other outlets that not all POWs were the same. Not all of them were ardent Nazis. Some of them didn't want to be fighting. And so to let people understand that story, but approach it from a different medium, have them see artwork, and then help them better understand via that art what the other side of the story is. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Camp Forrest, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time examining the prisoners of war. And what I always like to do, because I hope you learn something from me, but it's equally important for myself and I think for others, if you have a question, stop me, raise your hand, and ask, because we can all learn from one another. There's so many small stories that add to the wonderful patchwork of information that's already out there. So if you have a question, please give me a holler. Okay, double-sided. I had technology issues. This is only like number 7 of today, so bear with me if I sputter a bit. But Camp Forrest was a World War II military installation that did induction training and POWs housing. It was on about 80,000 acres in Tullahoma. It began as a National Guard training facility called Camp P. So about 1926 to about 1939, the National Guard used a little over 1,000 acres. And when our federal government realized at some point we were going to be entering a war, Tennessee reached out and through a lot of negotiations managed to get the contract to expand that 1,000 to that 80,000 acres. There were about 250,000 soldiers that received their initial physical exams, 70,000 soldiers who trained there, and this is just on Camp Forrest proper. That doesn't include those that passed through Middle Tennessee with the Tennessee maneuvers, and 12,000 civilians who were employed there. What people also don't know is Camp Forrest housed civilian internees. There were about 800 that started coming in 1943. And then over 60,000 POWs were processed and 20,000 were actually detained there. And for those that might not know, the Tennessee maneuvers were the simulated war games exercises that took place through the 26 counties in Middle Tennessee. So from 1940 to 1946, a massive number of people were in and around Camp Forrest and Middle Tennessee. It worked out to have such a major installation there because it was more agrarian. Wouldn't quite fit well in New York or Chicago, but for the economics and the land available, Middle Tennessee was perfect. Now, construction started late 1940, which is over $700 million in today's dollars. There were over 1,300 buildings, 55 miles of roads, and 5 miles of railroad tracks. If you can just envision how massive that was. And by spring of 1941, the first troops started to arrive. In just a mere 18 months, construction from ground to ready for receiving troops occurred. I don't think we could probably do that today, but maybe. It was a self-sustained city. It had everything and didn't particularly need anything from outside communities. It was a training ground for infantry, artillery, engineering, and signal units as well. There were also several specialty schools there, cooks and bakers, chemical warfare. If you've been to Tullahoma or if you come off Interstate 24 and you're riding past AEDC, right where AEDC, that first gate is, you're going to be traveling on what was the original Camp Forrest Road. So go a little bit slow as you're going through and you look on the left and the right and you're going to see a lot of roads. And there are dirt berms, but those are the company streets and all the roads going through Camp Forrest. That Wattendorf Highway is the original Forrest Boulevard. So you're riding down back through history on the same roads that our troops and others used at that time. Now, I had mentioned Arnold Engineering, and a lot of people know them. They are on about 40,000 of the original 80,000 acres, and then the National Guard uses about 18,000 acres of that original 80. But the rest is vacant and pretty much a time capsule. There are chimneys, roads that are like they are original, like built within the last couple of months, some foundations. What intrigues me the most is there are tank and jeep tracks that you can see out there today. I guess that's one reason we can compliment red clay. That's the only one I can think of. If y'all have had encounters with the fabulous red clay. So there's not much left. So for me, I see it as a responsibility and an opportunity to make sure that this history is not lost to time again. Because when it was decommissioned and dismantled, everybody was ready to move on. And so that history just, over time, fell out of the mindset. But what people don't also understand is there was an Army Air Corps facility not even a mile from Camp Forrest. And it was its own facility. It did advanced flight training, and it was William Northern Army Airfield. Today, you'd know it as the Tullahoma Regional Airport. Now, everything is gone except for one hangar that they've renovated, and the runways are still the original runways and still in fabulous shape. But it was the state's third largest airport, training B-24 bombers, observation plane pilots, paratroopers. It was about 1,300 acres. So if you are ever out that way, take from, yes ma'am.
Is any of this, and excuse me for interrupting, but is any of this what MTSU Flight School has moved to?
Yes ma'am, they're moving to what was Northern Field. So they're on those original runways. I think they've got, if I've heard correctly, one of the two hangars buildings out there.
So it is on the forest land?
Northern Field, but yes ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And let's see, they started receiving people late spring of '42 as well. And then it was named William Northern after the 1st Tennessean that was killed in World War II. Now, on to what y'all really came to hear about. With POWs, approximately 425,000 were brought to the U.S. via Liberty ships. So we used the Liberty ships to take our soldiers over, but rather than have them come back empty, we loaded them with another type of people, the POWs. And there were about 700 encampments located throughout the U.S. Generally, they were in warmer climates. We did have some that were in Washington State and some of the colder climates. But the reason for having them in warmer environments is because it was supposed to mirror what they would have come from. So that's why it was really important for that. Now, primarily the POWs that came were German and Italian, but I think it gets lost that the nationalities varied greatly. You had individuals from Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Africa, and a lot of other Eastern European areas. The reason for that, and some may or may not know, is these people were told you will either fight for Germany or we will kill you and your entire family. And so with that type of proposition, I too probably would join as well. So it's not to say that there weren't any ardent Nazis that were brought to the U.S. There certainly were. And the camps tried as quickly as they could to have those people shifted to another installation. And that one was Camp Alva out in Oklahoma. I guess because Oklahoma was literally out in the middle of nowhere. That's the only reason why I've been able to figure that out as well. I've heard stories where German soldiers had kind of a list that if you saw the Americans, run to them because they have the best POW camps and will treat you right. So you'd run to them to surrender as quickly as you could. Next were British, France, Russia, run quickly the other way. So the these were prisoners of the Wehrmacht, which was Germany's unified army from about 1935 to 1945. And a lot of the POWs that came to Camp Forrest were captured after von Arman surrendered to the U.S. and British forces. So we had him and 150,000 Afrika Korps soldiers that were detained at various collection points throughout North Africa until ships could be available to send them on that 2-week journey to the U.S. Now, Colonel Wolfe was the POW commander at Camp Forrest, and I have had the wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to his son. Colonel Wolfe lived to be about 97, so he told his son a lot of stories, so I do have some of that firsthand knowledge about what he saw, the people, the stories as well. But Colonel Wolfe sent in late spring 1943 MPs to go and collect his designated set of POWs from North Africa. And so when they got back, they rode trains to Camp Forrest, to Middle Tennessee. Now, the trains had blacked out windows, and that was an effort to try to disorient POWs, to make escape attempts difficult. And so these first prisoners, there were about 1,500 Germans, and they came in June of 1943. But by 1946, there were over 20,000 POWs at Camp Forrest, so it kept increasing and increasing. Now, one thing that I like to do at this point is to take a quick moment for a definition. In World War II, the prisoners of war, POWs, were members of the armed forces who were captured by the opposing side during combat. And one of the things that distinguished the U.S. from all other nations that adhered to the Geneva Convention, because the treatment of POWs was outlined in that particular document. Some, like Britain and France, kind of loosely adhered to it, but the U.S. followed a very narrow interpretation of the rights and responsibilities that we had to POWs. And that was in the hopes that those nations that were holding our soldiers would see that we were treating their soldiers well, and that they would then treat ours as well. However, that level of reciprocity, as we well know today, didn't occur. And so the word prisoner is a bit of a misnomer, a little misleading, because POWs weren't prosecuted for participating in war. It was just a form of detainment. And by the time we entered World War II, Britain and France could not hold any POWs. And so we also got some from those nations as well, because of the destruction, because of the lack of food supplies and things of that. So it was mainly just to get them where they couldn't fight anymore. Now, there were 60,000 that came and were processed at Camp Forrest. Some, that 20,000, were permanently stationed. Some did stay for the entire time period, but it was more likely that they were sent on to another in camp. And again, trying to weed out those hardcore Nazis as well, because for the most part, according to Colonel Wolfe, they were just happy to be there. And so there were very few major incidences. He referred to those that happened were more like children fighting and silliness that occurred. And when there were what seemed to be major things that were going to happen, instead of being able to have hot showers and nice meals that they were afforded, cold water showers and bread and water. And soon compliance came back into fashion. In Tennessee, there were about 11 facilities. Now, some did pop up, just depending on the time of the year, what was being done as far as agriculture harvesting. We had Camp Forrest. Some may have heard of Camp Crossville. And Crossville was the only camp in the U.S. that housed specifically officers. So you had a lot of high-level German officers, and at the time, some Italian. But when the German and Italians were housed, they were kept separate because of the conflicting views. We had Camp Campbell, and then the Memphis Armed Services Forces Depot over in Memphis. There were satellite branches in Huntsville, Lawrenceburg, Jackson, Tennessee, Sale Creek, Tellico Plains, and Nashville. They were also sent to other states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. And a lot of them, the history kind of says, oh, they were at Fort Jackson. No, they came from Camp Forrest, and that's where they were housed after the fact. And that was specifically because Colonel Wolfe was from South Carolina. And he being a farmer himself, he knew all the people throughout that area and that harvesting was going to be difficult and the state was going to be impacted. So he sent a lot of them there to ensure his home state was taken care of as well. Now, one of the things, as you might expect, there were not a lot of translators in these camps. There were some that could speak German. There were some German POWs that could speak English, but they created little sheets that had little cartoons on them. So like a little coat, and then the English word and the German word. And so they used pictograms so they could all kind of get on the same page. There were courses that were offered for POWs to help improve the language skills, as well as U.S. soldiers to help improve theirs. There were a lot of educational opportunities that POWs could take advantage of. Some were even able to do college courses. At first, they started as correspondence courses, but as the war progressed, college professors actually came and offered courses to POWs. And some actually obtained a degree before they went home. Now, the War Department's aim in educating them was to help the POW respect the quality and potency of American institutions, and so that they would take democracy home as they rebuilt their nation. They had what was called the intellectual diversion programs to influence the German POWs, that American culture and its people should be appreciated and respected. And a lot of them took those courses and used that as an opportunity to better themselves. As time progressed, they started a camp newspaper, could do other correspondence courses that might not be offered at Camp Forrest. Some of the courses, history, geography, English, and I've seen certificates where they've completed the course, successfully completed American history and things of that nature. Recreation time was full of activities: music, plays, sports, drawings, paintings. The YMCA and a lot of other organizations brought materials in so POWs could have things to do. And that was again part of the Geneva Convention to ensure there was adequate recreational facility activities available. POWs could actually have a job, and a lot of them did during their confinement. Assignments were based typically on their skill set, their interest level. They could work as doctors, nurses, orderlies, pharmacy. Now, they were working not in the hospital that was where U.S. soldiers were, but they were POW-based hospitals. Camp Forrest had one of the largest station hospitals, and with that, when they built the hospital for the POWs, it became one of the largest ones. So we had a lot of specialized training. So POWs were sent there for medical treatment if they couldn't be taken care of it there where they were at before that. You had camp cooks, mechanics, groundkeepers, farming. One of the biggest kerfluffles was the weaving of camouflage nets. The POWs, if you will, went on strike because they knew the Geneva Convention inside and out, and they said, you cannot employ us to create items for the war effort. And so the U.S.'s loophole was, well, it's not being sent over for the war effort, it's for training. So But at the height of that camouflage net project, the POWs produced over 100 square feet per day. And there were about 6,000 POWs working on that project. A lot of them saw it, again, as an opportunity. Those that wanted to get in the medical field had that opportunity and began to learn from the ground up the medical, whether it was dental, orderlies, or anything of that fashion. Most were amenable to working assignments because it was either work or be bored to tears. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have any that were arrogant or lazy or uncooperative, and that was fine. You just go sit over there and be quiet. Was kind of the mentality. But usually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you get bored. And so POWs could earn 80 cents per day working, and that's according to the Geneva Convention. Those pay rates were to mirror what we paid our soldiers. So farmers could come and talk to the CO and say, I need 10 POWs to help with farm work. That farmer had to pay $1.50 a day to per POW for that work. That POW got 80 cents, but the remaining was used to help defray the costs of detaining them. So whether it was paying for food costs or housing, the U.S. government had a little fund that it could do that. It was reported in one of the newspapers that for the civilian labor, the Army would have had to incur an additional cost of $3.52 per man per day to have the similar tasks completed. So we were getting cheap labor, and you talk to some farmers, some could listen, and one in particular was a tobacco farmer, and the son said, yes, we kept running out of tobacco knives. We kept having to have them repaired because they weren't cutting them. They were cutting them all which way. But at the end of the day, they were able to get the harvests in. They could use their pay to buy stuff in the PXs. We issued them little tickets, little chits, and they could get candy, ice cream, Coke, beer, toiletries. They were only allowed 1 beer a day, and it was 3-2. Now, my understanding with 3-2, you can drink it, and it's like drinking a soda. So what a group of POWs devised is they took their chit, and they would get essentially a 6-pack, and each person had a day. Today, you get all 6 and a buzz. Tomorrow, you get all 6 and get a buzz. So that's they kind of worked it out. Or they could save their money, and when it was time to return to their home country, my understanding is they wrote them kind of a check that they would then, when they were home, take to a U.S. Installation over there, and they would cash it and give them the money when they got there. Let's see. Now, even though we had a lack of translators, a lot, especially at Camp Forest, you didn't have a whole lot of guards. Those that were guarding were older people or 4Fs that were not overseas fighting. But there were little disruptions and a few escapes given these. In Middle Tennessee, as y'all may well know, especially in Tullahoma, there ain't nowhere to go, especially in the winter. So after a few days, it was easy to recapture them. The FBI did their manhunts and brought, according to them, everyone back. But a lot of them came back and said, it's just too much work. Why? A lot of them were housed in the interior of the U.S. so they could not get on ships and get back overseas. So it was a lot of work if you actually were trying to escape. One of my particular favorite stories is a POW that was exposed to country music because they had radios and they could listen. And when he realized the Grand Ole Opry was not that far away, he devised a plan and saved up, got U.S. currency, got some civilian clothes, walked out of gate 1 like he knew what he was doing, managed to get his bus ticket to Nashville, managed to get his ticket to the Opry, enjoyed himself thoroughly, and when it was all over, went to the police station and said, "Take me back." So he didn't have to worry about that ticket back home. So there are little stories like that. And what I'll do is with Jeff, I'll get him the copy of the presentation so you can see some of these, but there was one map that was confiscated. It was the escape map, but it was a map of the entire U.S. And down at the bottom of Tennessee was Camp Forest. And so I think this POW was trying to decide, was it worth it? Where were we in the grand scheme of things? And both bodies of water, very far away, a very long walk because of just the sheer enormity of it. Now, POWs were housed in small huts or barracks, just depending on where they were, and the huts were wooden 16 by 16 buildings with tar paper. POWs could decorate the inside. Some of them were phenomenal artists. Some of them got flowers, and so they decorated the outside. Camp Forest, when they saw that a lot of the POWs were wasting food, they started to allow them to cook their own cuisine that was specific to them. They had a vegetable garden, fruit trees that they would harvest, and that also helped defray costs with the POWs. And in the middle of the hutments was a big potbelly stove to keep them warm, and then there were windows so they could get cross breezes when it was sweltering hot in the summer. There were about 5 prisoners per hutment, and as you might expect, not everybody got along, but they did set up their little own government. And so for the most part, they were allowed to govern themselves until they got out of control. But a lot of the in-squabbling is, we don't want him in here because he believes in that Nazi stuff. We don't want him in here because he's lazy. And so people would have to be moved around. And those letters were actually written to Colonel Wolfe, and he had to actually act on them because he had to keep a log of what was done. The hutments were poorly insulated, and the rains caused those floors because they were, for the most part, sometimes, I wasn't there so I don't know exactly. Some say they were on the red clay ground. Some say there was a small wooden floor, but it was muddy and things of that. But all in all, treated fairly and had dental and medical facilities as well. They were allowed to write home, receive letters home and send them out. Now, the American and German postal censors made sure there were no hidden messages, but for the most part, they were just writing to let their loved ones know they were okay. And a number of the letters say that I've gained 20 pounds since I've been here. Don't send food, I don't need it. They had that specifically designated, and some of you may have seen it, green paper. And that was so that those postal censors could easily see if there were hidden messages on there. Let's see. A lot of them after the war came back wanting to see where they had been, I guess closure, if you will. A lot of them continued writing letters back to those families and those farmers because they developed strong relationships. Well into the 80s, those letters were written. I like to say that, it was a time of war, but Tennessee really chose humanity and compassion for individuals that were considered an enemy of the state. And let's see. As far as deaths that occurred, there were about 87 POWs that died at Camp Forest, which, if you think about it, it's a relatively relatively low number across 4 years, given the number of people that were there. 73 died of natural causes, 4 in accidents, and 1 in an escape attempt. He attacked a guard. And then there were 7 suicides. Let's see. Some people will tell you some were buried at Camp Forest, some were buried in city cemeteries, but everybody was sent to Crossville, and so that was the designated area in the state to bury POWs. And then after the war, they were reburied in the Chattanooga National Cemetery. That's what the federal government says. If you talk to people, they're like, nope, the headstone's there, the body's there. I don't know, I wasn't there, but it's possible. A lot of newspapers at the time, at the end of the war, talk about how the farmers were asking the federal government to delay sending POWs back because they needed help with the harvesting. And in some, they did, because it was at Christmas time, and they wanted those soldiers, our boys, to be able to be back at Christmas. But after that, there was a mass effort to send them home. And again, if you ask the federal government, everybody went back. But in reality, some did stay, some did make a life here and families. After the war, some went home and then came back. But everybody I've talked to has had no bad words to say about the experiences they had with the POWs. They talked about them being respectful, polite, and never a problem. One lady talked about at lunch with the Italian prisoners, you would hear these wonderful operas, them singing them as well as the records. With what I do, again, I look at the art because it gives us a glimpse into people's lives during a specific time and place, and you know, whether that art was created as a means of exchange, because a lot of POWs did sell their artwork. They had art shows at that time, and civilians were allowed to come in and buy that. Some did it because they were bored, homesickness. And I have a few beautiful landscapes, and I thought, well, why not? See if Google Lens is up to it. It actually found the real place. So the degree to which they could, by memory, recall that home place and draw it is phenomenal. And, you know, it gives us some insight of what was pre-war and what they were looking for post-war. And to me, I think it tells a more amazing story than textbook facts and figures. And in the PowerPoint, which I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to, it shows some of those works of art. So we'll get that so y'all can see some of those amazing things that they did. Paintings, drawings, metalworks, jewelry, anything that you can think of, it was pretty much carved. Just amazing period of time to see. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to entertain it. I hope I didn't go too fast. I just think there's so many wonderful things we can learn. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the PALs that were like, you know, like after the war or whatever, when they were trying to spread democracy, like Germany and stuff, what was their, I guess, thought process with like, because like Jim Crow was going on in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
so like the contradictions with that, how did they handle that stuff, I guess?
I can't say for sure, but I've not read anything that was addressed. I mean, it did occur because that was a touching point that POWs were treated better and more fairly than our African American soldiers. But I don't know that it was dealt with as far as in classes and so forth.
I have
Yes, sir.
read that the prisoners ate the same food as their guards. Is that true?
I think initially, yes, that they cooked and had the same thing, but when they saw that they didn't like white bread as opposed to the rye and stuff, they allowed them to cook that in an effort
I
to.
meant basically equivalent, not exactly the same, but equivalent, so the guards got steak, the prisoners got steak. and-
That was a big deal too. A lot of senators called that into action, and that was in the news that we were treating POWs better and they had food that our own civilians didn't have. Now, the outcome as far as what was reported in the news is that wasn't true, but I think it was. They did have access to that. Any other questions?
To kind of tag on that a little bit, there was I was reading an account from a German officer that came to Camp Crossville. When they got off the train, they were all very worried that they saw American public kind of on the train depots, and they're like worried that they're gonna get spat on and yelled at. And they got off the train at the station, and the people started walking up to them, and they're handing them food. And the German officer said a lady walked up to him and handed him a jar of peanut butter. He said he never had peanut butter in his entire life, and he said he tried it one time, he's not stopped eating peanut butter. But I think it was something that, they were exposed to things they'd never seen or had before. I do have a question, I was kind of interested. Talking about the guards at the camp, could you elaborate a little bit more about what 4F means? And also kind of like what, any accounts of the interactions between the guards and the prisoners that you have found?
4F was the classification that someone had, I don't want to say problem, but were not able to be sent overseas.
Unfit for service.
Unfit for service, exactly. It could be a medical malady, it could be vision, it could be anything. And so it wasn't always necessarily a bad thing because the U.S. Army was very strict in what they wanted as far as soldiers. It relaxed a little bit as time went on. But for the most part, the interactions that I've heard, they were just doing the job. And as each learned the other, that they didn't want to escape and they were fine, it relaxed a little bit. They weren't as, with their weapons. There were some that did have problems. That's not to say everybody was just happy. It just varied, but from what I've read and seen for the most part, everybody kind of established a relationship, knowing what to do, what not to do. Those that were troublemakers, problems, were segregated to a specific part so that you could have that harmony throughout the encampment. Yes?
I've heard that American POWs were treated better in Germany than perhaps some other countries, prisoners in Germany. Do you think that might have been because of how we treated the German POWs, that they reciprocated, or?
I can't answer that definitively, yes or no. My understanding from what I've heard, what we see at every camp was not necessarily with the harsh treatment, with the horrible conditions across the board, but I don't know. I think it depended on who was in charge. Some got better treatment as far as getting Red Cross packages and things like that, and some were just awful and died because of that neglect and sheer atrocities that occurred. Yes, sir.
How long did it take them to ship the POWs back to Europe after the war ended?
As far as getting everybody out and back, or?
Yeah, were they all back over there in 46 or 47 or?
I would say everybody was back by 47, only because we took that break, because we wanted as many of our soldiers home for Christmas that year. So by mid-47, they started with POWs that had the worst medical conditions, getting them out first, and then as many ambulatory ones from there. According to the federal government, anyway. Yes.
Where do they keep like Japanese military prisoners during the war? I'm just kind of curious to how many United States were out at sea somewhere in the islands.
My understanding is there was only a very small number of Japanese POWs here. I've seen the figure around 5,500, and my understanding is they were at one installation, but right now I can't recall it. But there were only a small number of them here.
One more question. This was on the pamphlet. Like, did when they placed the Confederate flag, or whatever, and when they raised the Confederate flag, or whatever, was there like members of the unit that like maybe didn't agree with like what was going on with that? Like, was there like like
Like we have today?
formal?
I don't know. I wasn't there. Perhaps, but everything, because it was national news. He made news across the board. Not that I've seen. Yes, sir.
In discussing bringing the prisoners from Europe to the States, I know there was a big problem in the Pacific about Japanese shipping, sinking troop ships, us sinking ships that the Japanese had loaded with POWs. I just find it kind of strange, as hard as it was to get convoys to Europe. How did that relate to the convoys coming back, bringing prisoners, or were they aware and, illuminated ships? What would they do, to keep German submarines from attacking these ships?
Oh, it was the same instance, and that was one of the biggest fears of the POWs. They were going to be sunk by their own German soldiers. Generally, what they would do is radio what was on board, that it wasn't U.S. soldiers, that it was POWs. Some didn't care and they were sunk, and some did make it through. But yes, that was a big fear of POWs and those ships coming back, because it was the same situation coming back as going over. How many were sunk and details like that, I don't have that level of detail yet. But I know it did occur.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I do want to thank y'all so much for coming out, and
Thank you, yes.
Whenever we get the new visitor center Carter House, where we're going to have the round table is going to be a lot better. The technology is going to be a lot better. So bear with us. Thank y'all again so much for being very patient. If you haven't had a chance to walk through the gift shop, we've got some new stuff, some books on sale. Feel free to check that out. If you are visiting with us today, you're not a member, you want to become a member, you can do that at the counter as well. If you want to renew your membership, you can do that at the counter as well. But again, thank y'all so much for coming out and talking with us today, or visiting with us today.
Thank you.
She said that she would give you the presentation so you could forward it.
Yes.
How do we get a copy of the presentation?
So if you're on the email list, Lori will send it out. We'll give the presentation to Lori, she'll send it out.
Okay.
If you don't think you're on our email list, give me your email address and I'll.
I got the meeting notice.
Okay.
So it's the same thing.
Yeah, it'll be that, yes, yes, yeah. But thank you again so much for coming out.
Thank you so much.